FIP event called Embracing Technology in the Pharmaceutical Sector, an African Perspective. And today is the part number 2, episode number 2. So be all very welcome. Before I introduce myself, I would, of course, like to thank our colleagues who are in the back office supporting us, making sure that everything goes smoothly and well. Marianne van der Ven, Aisu Selsuk, and Abdi. Thank you for your kind involvement in this digital event. My name is Jaime Acosta, Jamie, if you prefer, and I'm the FIP Community Pharmacy Section past professional secretary and the current FIP Technology Advisory Group co-chair with my colleague Lars Åke Söderlund from Sweden. In the next slide, I have some quick announcements. First, that this webinar is being recorded and live streamed via YouTube. The recording will be available on our website, events.fip.org. You are more than welcome to ask questions using the question box that the Zoom platform provides. And you're also very welcome to provide your feedback at the email address webinars@fip.org, whether it's something that you missed in this webinar or a topic that you would like FIP to develop in the future. We are super open to your suggestions, of course. And last but definitely not least, please consider becoming an FIP member at the website provided, fip.org/membership /registration. I've been an FIP member for more than 12 years now, and I can say in a very safely manner that my life, not only professionally, but also personally, has changed by meeting colleagues that are really transforming pharmacy worldwide. In the next slide, we will cover today's agenda. A very brief opening and introduction by me, your moderator today. We will have the first speaker covering electronic narcotics records, the chronicles of WebDD, landscape assessment of telemedicine and e-pharmacy channels among retail pharmacies in Uganda. And last, but again not least, emerging technologies for health equity, the Zipline Ghana case study. Then please do not miss the chance of asking our very knowledgeable speakers your questions that will be covered live, and very fast closing remarks by me to close the event. In the next slide, our today's learning objectives is to describe the digital solutions pharmacists in Africa have created in order to solve problems unique to the setting, to demonstrate the extent of adoption of digital solutions within the pharmaceutical sector in Africa, to isolate the hurdles that pharmacists in Africa face when implementing and adopting digital solutions, and to identify collaboration opportunities for the FIP and the rest of the international community. Today's panelists follow the second episode from this Embracing Technology in the Pharmaceutical Sector and African Perspective events. We had the previous one on the 14th of October, just 1 week ago. In the next slide, you can see our speakers for today, who I would like really to thank them for their involvement and expertise that very generously they are sharing with all of you. Mr. Takunda Mukumba, Dr. Nabembesi Siara Salwango, and Mr. Samuel Afuko. Thank you for being with us today. I will introduce them as they deserve before they start their presentations. The FIP development goals launched by the International Pharmaceutical Federation in September 2020 are a key resource for transforming the pharmacy profession over the next decade globally, regionally, and nationally. They align with FIP's mission to support global health by enabling the advancement of pharmaceutical practice, sciences, and education, and are set to transform pharmacy in alignment with wider global imperatives underpinning the UN Sustainable Development Goals. They now also align with all our work and inform our direction to 2030. Digital FIP development goal number 20 is about digital health, and it is informed by and overseen by the FIP Technology Advisory Group. The FIP development goal number 20, digital health, links strongly, of course, to today's event. Development Goal 20, like all the other development goals, is made up of workforce and education, practice, and science elements. In the next slide, about digital health FIP Development Goal 20, globally, we will have enablers of digital transformation within the pharmacy workforce and effective processes to facilitate the development of a digitally literate pharmaceutical workforce to lead the change that the profession needs. Systems and structures are very important also in place to develop and deliver quality digital health and pharmaceutical care services through digital literacy and utilization of technology and digital enablers. Of course, our event today covers a lot of systems and structures that are unique to Africa. Application of digital technology in healthcare delivery and development of innovative medical products. In the next slide, it is my pleasure to briefly introduce you to the FIP Technology Advisory Group, which, as I said, I have the honor of co-chairing with my colleague Lars-Åke Suderlund. This advisory group is made up of FIP members with expertise and or interest in areas related to its scope. We meet bi-monthly to organize business plans and the business plan and deliverables that we deliver to FIP constituencies and our member organizations. Our focus area in the next slide for 2024 cover digital trends in pharmacy and healthcare, advancements and digital uses of medical devices and digital therapeutics, market disruptors and their impact on patient care and pharmacy practice, the use of technology to support pharmacy education, pharmacy practice, and pharmaceutical science, the impact of mobile health and wearable technology, standards, terminologies, and interoperability, health information technology best practices and standards, and the advancement and use of artificial intelligence systems, which have exploded recently in pharmacy and healthcare. These focus areas, of course, are not stable. They change on a continuous way. In the next slide, I would like to show you very briefly some resources that are available to you, even if you are not an FIP member. If you have the appetite to discover more about technology and pharmacy, you can find these reports and tools on the FIP website. They are free for you. The use of mobile health tools in pharmacy practice, FIP digital health in pharmacy education. This is a very innovative and big report, first on its class. The online pharmacy operations and distribution of medicines, done by the community pharmacy section. How can digital health interventions support national pharmaceutical care delivery and advancements in digital pharmacy post-COVID-19? We also have some webinars available for you in the FIP website. And in the next slide, of course, this is a very important resource if you're interested in digital health and pharmacy, is the Pharmaceutical Care in Digital Revolution, written by leaders very knowledgeable in digital health all over the world, from different backgrounds and settings and countries. So you can have a look at the book at the website. And now it's time for me to introduce you to our first speaker, who is also a Technology Advisory Group member, Mr. Takunda Mukumba. Is a very active member of the Technology Advisory Group and is the founder of eHealth Afro Private Limited. He has a Master of Medical Science degree in Medical Informatics from the University of KwaZulu-Natal. He is the creator of WebDD, Zimbabwe's electronic narcotics register. He is passionate about championing digital health, and I've seen his very active involvements in the Technology Advisory Group, so that's very true. Takunda, thank you for being with us today. The floor is yours. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Jaime, for the introduction. Since you've already given the learning objectives, I'm just going to go straight into the presentation. But before I begin, I just want to open with us by saying, in order for us to determine the best direction we're going to take for the establishment of digital health in Africa, we have to map the digital health landscape as accurately as possible. And in order for us to make this landscape, we have to start by answering basic anthropological questions, such as who are these Africans? Um, how do their paradigms vary from region to region, and particularly those who run the affairs of the continent? Which direction does their moral compass point? What is their reputation? That is, reputation is the things that we know about them, or the things that we think, or the people who we think they are. What is their character? And so reputation versus character is who they really are versus what we know about them. Are they benevolent people, or are they maleficent people? How do they view digital health? How do they respond to fellow Africans making strides in this field of digital health and attempting to extend the benefits of digital health to their citizens? And do they have, once we answer these questions, we need to establish, do we as Africans have a track record of behaviors that can corroborate the responses to these questions that I've just asked? And we cannot afford to answer these questions just in general. We have to stratify these answers. We have to stratify by age group. So we need to compare between the older pharmacists and the youngest pharmacists, for example. We need to stratify by region or by country, because different countries are in different phases of digital health implementation. So we need to stratify by country. Also need to stratify within the pharmacy profession, stratify by pharmacists within policy making, pharmacists in the regulatory space, and other pharmacists in different areas of practice. And the more we stratify and the more accurately we answer these questions for each stratum, the more useful the more useful the digital health landscape map we create will be. And as we hear presentations from different countries, we're going to realize that our map of this digital health landscape, in our map of this digital health landscape, there are different places. There are some places with peaks and valleys. That's a figure of speech. Some places with fruit trees and other places with thorns. Some places are going to be, and we're also going to appreciate the different climatic conditions of these spaces. And I'm talking about the conducive environment for implementation of digital health. All right. And if once we accurately map our digital health landscape, from then we can also then strategize on how to move forward in terms of implementation of digital health. All right. So let's just go straight into the presentation. Sorry, can you start from the beginning, Aisu? All right, the second slide, the next one. All right, so I'm going to make some disclaimers in this presentation. Obviously, I represent eHealth Afro and WebDD, but in this narrative that I'm going to give, there are some other parties that are involved, and we need to assume that the role in the involvement that they played was in good faith, unless it no longer makes intellectual sense to maintain that assumption, and also that the opinions that I'm going to raise in this webinar are my own and not the FIP's. Can you go down 2 slides? All right, so this is a story about my journey with WebDD, how I created electronic narcotics records in Zimbabwe, how I digitized the electronic narcotics recording system in the country. So early in 2015, I was a young pharmacist and I was working in a clinic that moved a lot of narcotics. And I found the recording of narcotics transactions to be cumbersome, because after dispensing, on the computer software, I would still have to record my narcotics transactions in a hard copy book in partial fulfillment of the Dangerous Drugs Act and its regulations. Next slide. And I found that this was duplication of work, because the time that I was using to record my narcotics transactions manually could have been time that I was using for patient counseling and clinician collaboration. And also these registers were difficult to keep intact, because I had to keep handling these books, and sometimes you tear a page or two. It was also easy to make calculation errors, because you're just doing mental calculations and it's very easy to take for granted. Next slide. I think I've read. And also the other disadvantage of these hard copies is they're actually not tamper-proof, as tamper-proof as the law intended them for them to be, because a person can easily create a new set of records and replace the book even before a regulatory inspection. So they're not that tamper-proof. Next slide. So I decided to digitize the narcotics recording system for the country. And upon realizing that this was a noble idea, I went forward to secure intellectual property with the African Regional Intellectual Property Organization. Next slide. Next slide. All right, so what is WebDD? So WebDD is the narcotics recording system, the digital narcotics recording system that I then created. It's a regulatory authority approved narcotics register. It replaces the paper-based system, and it promotes timely and efficient record keeping of narcotics. And also digitization is environmentally friendly, and it promotes the accurate information for the, it promotes availability of accurate narcotics information for the relevant people at the right time. Next slide. So this is just showing you what the dangerous drugs regulations require in terms of the information that needs to be kept in the narcotics register. Next slide. And so currently we have these manual books. We also now have the electronic system, and this is what we're trying to move away from. Next slide. And we're trying to just create a digital environment in the pharmacy working space. Next slide. All right, so WebDD caters. So when I designed WebDD, I decided to have it cater for the entire pharmaceutical chain, supply chain of narcotics. That means from the manufacturers to the retailers, the wholesalers, right down to the patient. So when the manufacturers import raw materials that are classified as narcotics, they can record their transactions in that system, as well as the wholesalers when they are dispatching their narcotics to the community pharmacies, and when the community pharmacies dispense to the patients. So the entire supply chain is captured within WebDD. And then WebDD also has an access portal for the regulatory authorities to then track the movement and usage of narcotics within the country. Next slide. And also this also helps with submitting accurate narcotics returns to the International Narcotics Control Body, as well as just monitoring the consumption of narcotics within the country. It also eliminates certain errors that we make when we're recording our transactions if we're going to record them manually. Next slide. And how does it work? So how WebDD works is simply the pharmacists and the institutions that are interested in digitizing their narcotics transactions, they simply go onto the website and then they fill in a registration form and submit their credentials, whether it's a practicing license or a dispensing license or a premises license for their workplace. And once that verification process happens, their electronic narcotics register becomes available for use. Next slide. All right. So also on we also try to make sure that WebDD does indeed save time and promotes the accurate recording of information. So what we did is we made sure that it was interoperable with other systems. So we also then were able to integrate with other dispensing software, so that when the pharmacists are dispensing their medicines, if one of the medicines is a narcotic or two of the medicines are a narcotic, the information is transmitted directly into their electronic narcotics register without them having to log on to the portal, which again saves time. And this is also available in the enterprise resource management systems of the wholesalers and the manufacturers, should they be interested in integrating. So this it streamlines the workflow and promotes accuracy and transparency. Next slide. And that's me with one of our integration partners in South Africa. Next slide. All right, and we also created an offline version for the institutions that were in areas that had erratic internet connectivity, so that they can still maintain their narcotics records electronically. When the internet is back up, the desktop version will transmit the information onto the web portal automatically. So this is just to promote continuous electronic record keeping. Next slide. Okay, so I think I've already mentioned this, that it caters for the whole entire pharmaceutical sector. And these are some of the accolades we got on account of this work. Next slide. And this was just a ceremonial photo after signing some contracts when we got the approval of WebDD. Next slide. All right. So this is now the journey of how we engage the regulatory authorities to get to the approval of WebDD. So this journey began in 2015, as I mentioned, but I'm going to fast forward to 2020, where we got permission to to pilot WebDD alongside the paper-based system. Next slide. So we wrote to the Medicines Control Authority of Zimbabwe, which is our regulatory body, and asked for permission to pilot this system alongside the paper-based system. And we got this permission to run a pilot. Next slide. All right. So after we got this permission, we also had to clarify the conditions of success for this pilot. And then we got the approval in 2021. Next slide. So when they were specifying the conditions of success for this pilot, they mentioned two key important things: that we had to demonstrate we had to demonstrate that the patient details kept in WebDD would be kept confidential, which is in data security. And moreover, we also had to demonstrate that we had placed measures to keep WebDD safe from cyber attacks. So they were basically hammering in on data security. Next slide. So after running the pilot, and in order for us to meet those conditions of success, we had a cybersecurity audit run by Baker Tilly. It was actually a series of 3 cybersecurity audits. In the first 2 cybersecurity audits, they were doing penetration. Please don't move. They were doing penetration tests and vulnerability assessments. So we actually had 2 audits where we actually failed the audit, and then they recommended some updates on the system. And on the 3rd one, that's when we passed. And then we got a letter of attestation that we had passed the cybersecurity audit in the year 2020. Next slide. And for those who are interested in cybersecurity issues, this was their workflow. So they're basically doing penetration tests and vulnerability assessments, as well as assessing the databases and everything. Next slide. And these are some of the cybersecurity standards that they used in performing the cybersecurity audit. Next slide. All right, so some of the cybersecurity issues that were addressed during this pilot and during the audits were SQL injection, encryption of personal identifiable information and passwords, and also getting rid of obsolete components within the system so that it can be safe from cyber attacks. Next slide. So upon completion of the pilot, we then submitted a report to them, and then Baker Tilly also wrote a letter of attestation to MCAZ, and that's when we got the approval from our regulatory authorities. So the important thing here is to mention that the regulatory authorities demonstrated their ability to assess a system and see whether or not it can be put on the market based on the standards that they'd given us. And we also were able to meet those standards. Next slide. That's just a snippet of our report. Next slide. And so this is the approval that we got from our regulatory authorities after we'd done the pilot. And then so the approval is basically acknowledging that we met the conditions of success, the conditions of success during the pilot. And we were able to demonstrate that we had put in place some cybersecurity measures based on the cybersecurity audit, which we then passed on the 15th of November 2020. Next slide. All right, so after we got this this approval, we decided to collaborate further with our regulatory authorities, and we proposed the secondment arrangement where we would fund a secondment arrangement where some of their officers would use WebDD for their regulatory duties, as well as assess the movement of narcotics using our portal, and we were going to fund that. So that means technically it was going to also supplement some of the remuneration of their officers. But this secondment was rejected, and they offered for a training and an exchange of SOPs instead. So we conducted training for the regulatory authority officers, and we also gave them our SOPs, and that was done in January 2023. Next slide. All right, so this is now the part that I call the circus. All right, so after we'd engaged our regulators in good faith and completed the pilot, we got the approval. We'd offered to fund a secondment collaboration, which was denied. And we also got contracts and users. We onboarded users onto WebDD that were actually, those were actually financial arrangements between us and WebDD users. Next slide. All right, so sorry, you skipped 2 slides. All right. Can you go back up? All right. So after we started, we got users on board. We started getting some reports from our users that when they were inspected by our regulatory authorities, they were being told that even if they're using the electronic narcotics records, they still should maintain hard copies. And the argument from the regulatory authorities was that the regulations say that a drug register should be a bound book. And their interpretation of a bound book was that it can only be a hard copy, whereas our interpretation of a bound book is it can also be electronic, because bound book simply means you cannot randomly rearrange the pages, in a nutshell. Next slide. So we decided to write to the regulatory authorities for clarity in terms of their interpretation of the approval that they'd given us, number one, and their interpretation of the law. But they didn't write back to us. But because we owed our users a formal position, lest we lose our contracts and lose our reputation and everything like that, we actually then decided to approach the courts. And the basis on which we approached the courts is that we wanted the courts to declare or to offer a declarator so that when the regulations are read and the definition of a drug register is read, to say a drug register is a bound book, it must also mean an electronic version of that book. And then, of course, we launched this process, and surprisingly, our regulators also resisted this court application. Next slide. Okay, so this is just talking about the interpretation of their interpretation of what a dangerous drugs register should be, and it can only be a bound book. And they're also, one of their arguments was also that a bound book is tamper-proof. Next slide. All right, so this matter was actually heard by the High Court of Zimbabwe on the 3rd of October 2024. The judgment has been reserved, but during this the hearing, the actual hearing, the oral submissions of the regulatory authorities were that eHealth Afro had made this court application solely for financial gain. The other oral submission that they made is that we should have approached the Minister of Health instead of the courts. However, by law, we can also approach the courts to change the interpretation or to add to the interpretation of a law. And then the other oral submission that they'd made is that they insisted that hard copy books were also tamper-proof, and that they insisted on the maintenance of hard copy narcotics records. And then the last oral submission that they made is that the pharmaceutical companies themselves that keep narcotics records had not complained about the hard copies. So this matter is still pending ruling. So this is just a journey to show you what it's like to champion digital health in Africa. Next slide. And then another fascinating issue that adds on to this scenario is that Zimbabwe has been facing drug abuse issues. And consequently, in June 2024, the president of Zimbabwe actually launched what's called the Multi-Sectoral Drug and Substance Abuse Plan. And this drug and substance abuse plan acknowledges the need for a digital tool to accurately monitor the movement of narcotics within the pharmaceutical sector in order to prevent their leakage into illicit markets. And this is exactly what we designed WebDD to do. So the president knows what needs to be done. We know what needs to be done. I'm not sure what's happening in the regulatory space. Next slide. Okay, that's just a photo of the multi-sectoral drug and substance abuse plan. Next slide. And then the other fascinating scenario is that most of our regulatory work is actually headed by pharmacists who understand the need to digitize some of these things. In fact, our regulatory authority has digitized most of their processes. So this is what also makes the scenario interesting. So this is basically our journey, just so you understand and appreciate that how different jurisdictions respond to different digital health initiatives. I'm pretty sure that's the last slide. Next slide. Okay, that's it. All right, so that was my journey, ladies and gentlemen. Over to you, Jaime.
Thank you, Takuna, for your presentation. Although FIP does not endorse a specific system, I personally feel your journey, your pain. I was the chief of the implementation of the electronic prescription system in Madrid. It was a very hard but very interesting time. And previously to that, we also had to have our records on a hard copy on paper, introducing manually the name of the prescriber, the the license number, the number of boxes that we dispensed. It was a nightmare. And now we are in this electronic system that everything works automatically. Only we need to still print the electronic records and sign them manually for inspection. But our life, and probably in the next months, we will add our electronic signature to that instead of having to print all those records. But of course, a digital system is so much better in terms of environment and accuracy, and of course, the time that all that takes is better put into our clinical skills, of course. Takunda,
True.
thank you for your presentation. I would like to encourage our attendees to ask their questions for you in the chat. And it is time now to move to our next speaker. Thank you, Takunda. It is Dr. Nabembesi Siada Salwango. She is a passionate pharmacist with more than 15 years of experience, and she bridges stakeholder divides to improve access to medicines and diagnostic. Skilled in project management, health systems research, and digital health. She leverages data to enhance access through innovative interventions and customer-centric solutions. Nabembesi, thank you so much for being with us today. The floor is yours. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Jamie. I hope you can all hear me. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, it's very clear. Yeah. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Earlier I had some technical issues. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone, depending on where you're coming from. They've already given a brief introduction about myself, so I will just dive right in and get to the topic of discussions today. So I am a healthcare consultant and co-founder of Dumake Global Health. Dumake Global Health is a Ugandan-based consultancy firm, so we mainly deal in healthcare solutions through research, capacity building, and policy engagement to be able to support healthcare system strengthening. And we like to describe ourselves as here to be catalysts or drivers for change, the change we want to see within the healthcare systems or healthcare policies. So what I'm going to be sharing with you is a research we earlier did this year for the Ministry of Health in Uganda. The interest was to understand the operation of online digital platforms. We all appreciate that during the time of COVID-19, because of the lockdown and everything, there was a lot of shift of healthcare delivery services through telemedicine or utilizing all different forms of digital platforms. So the ministry was trying to understand this landscape better to see how to best regulate it and ensure that the services that are being offered remain safe and of good quality to the end users. So our next slide, please. So presentation outline, I will just give you a brief background of the work that we did, what was the aim of the assignment, the methods we used, what were our key study findings, and we talked to quite a number of different stakeholders. I will be sharing the stakeholder recommendations. Then also guidelines were developed to support the ministry in how best they can regulate these online digital platforms, and also an implementation protocol. Next slide. A brief background on telemedicine and online digital health services. It's all encompassed into the framework of self-care. We remember earlier on, I think like maybe 2 or 3 years back, the World Health Organization came up with a healthcare framework that was basically describing that there is a rise of individuals who are taking self-treatment into their own hands, and how can they best be guided to make sure that even though they're trying to get any kind of interventions, they remain quality interventions. So this is what is encompassed under healthcare, and even the work that we did is under healthcare. And mainly healthcare is being campaigned even by quite a number of different stakeholders, because it increases access to health information and also increases linkage between the end user and the healthcare system, because sometimes people may not want to go through the formal system, but they can easily just maybe pick up a phone and be able to contact a healthcare provider without being physically present. But also it's convenient. We're in a busy world today, and people day to day continue to look for what are the convenient channels we can use to be able to access healthcare services. So it becomes an area that is being largely advocated for, even by other global health organizations. Next slide, please. Next slide. So the aim of this assignment, we wanted to assess the environment of the digital provision of health products, especially through the online channels by the private sector in Uganda. And the specific objectives here, first of all, we wanted to look into understanding what's scoping the existing laws, policies, and guidelines for telemedicine and e-pharmacy practice, because it's an active practice, and the ministry was interested in understanding, first of all, what laws are out there that are helping us regulate this practice, and how can we best dive in to ensure that it's being well done. Then the other area objective was wanted to assess awareness, accessibility, and utilization of these online pharmacies for healthcare service delivery by the end users. We also wanted to assess the practices and the processes that are being utilized by the service providers when they're delivering services or products via telemedicine or online channels. And wanted to also identify what are opportunities, barriers, best practices, and recommendations to access health products and services via online channels, and then support the ministry to co-develop guidelines and implementation protocol and SOPs for e-pharmacy channels. Next slide. So the landscape assessment that we did, first of all, it was done nationally, and we adopted a mixed method approach, whereby it was both qualitative and quantitative approaches that were used. For example, we did desktop review, first of all, to understand, for example, what are the existing laws and policies that are supporting digital health in Uganda. Then we did qualitative interviews with key informants. And also we did focus group discussions. We looked at that. We were able to categorize the end users of these services, which are mainly the young people. And we brought together different groups of young people and engaged them to understand what are their experience utilizing these services through the focus group discussions. We also did mystery client surveys, where we pretended to be clients and engaged with the private sector, asking them questions to see how would they serve us, and we can be able to assess the quality of service delivery. And also we did service provider interviews. And a study area, like earlier mentioned, it was nationally done across Uganda. Uganda is divided into 4 regions, and we had study districts that were represented across the regions, that were mainly a total of 10 districts across the region. Next slide. So this is just a sample size to show the different kind of engagements we had via the different categories. For example, we targeted 35 key informants. We achieved 15, which is a 43%. Focus group discussions, we targeted 12, and we were able to achieve all the 12. We targeted 45 mystery client interviews. We did 42. And service providers themselves targeted 45, were able to meet all the 45. And then facility surveys, we targeted 144, but we're only able to achieve 121. Next slide. Ethical considerations, it was work that I had earlier said was already approved by the Ministry of Health. So we worked with them to co-design the approach of the study. And they were also able to approve the kind of stakeholders we engaged to, for example, get their perspective on digital and online pharmacy practice in Uganda. Next slide. So these are the key study findings. Next slide. These are the stakeholders that we mapped. Amongst our stakeholders at a higher level, we had the Ministry of Health itself, Ministry of ICT, which is Information Technology. And we also had the World Health Organization, regulators. We had the National Drug Authority, and other stakeholders. Now on the service providers level, we had startup companies that are involved in digital, that have run digital health platforms. We also had the national warehouses that are responsible for the purchase of medicines, the consumers themselves, professional bodies, especially with the Pharmaceutical Society of Uganda, academia and research institutions. We also had other non-medical online platforms. For example, like we have what we call Jumia. Jumia here is not a medical platform per se, but it's like a one-stop center whereby people do online purchases. So there are supermarkets, there are electronic shops, but there are also pharmacies. So we also had to engage them as a third-party platform on how they do actually work within this kind of online pharmacy delivery. Next slide. So these are the laws and policies that we went through to help us get an understanding of what is the provision, first of all, for digital health service delivery in Uganda, which enabled us to know where are the gaps that had to be strengthened to strengthen the mandate of implementation by the Ministry of Health. Next slide, please. So generally, what did we find out from the interviews that we carried on? First, we were trying to understand what to assess awareness. Are people aware of online pharmacy service delivery channels? And if they're aware of them, how are they accessible to them? And also, how do they use them? So with awareness, there was a high level of awareness that these channels are actually available in terms of the telemedicine channels and also the online pharmacy channels. People were aware, and this awareness was mainly sparked by COVID-19 because it became the primary channels of consultation with the healthcare system. And some people would also tell you that most of them got to be aware through, for example, some providers were actively engaging their kind of work on social media. There were email campaigns. Some company websites were also displaying promotional materials about this kind of channels. So so after that we said, okay, but can you access these services via the online services? And there were some factors they said that influenced their accessibility. One, people were a little apprehensive that as much as we are aware, we need to be really sensitized more on how these online channels work, because there are some people who are still stigmatized around digital health service delivery. They are more comfortable with the one-on-one approach. Then others, it was an issue of we don't have maybe effective access to social media, maybe as a result of areas where there is poor internet coverage. Next slide, please. And then in terms of availability and utilization, we went a step further to understand, okay, which e-pharmacy platforms are actually available. And as you can see there, we mainly had 5 platforms that were available. We had either utilizing the phone calls, WhatsApp messages, websites, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, as well as mobile delivery apps. Mobile delivery apps are where somebody, just uses an app. You connect to a service provider, then the service provider takes your order via an app, and then they deliver you with your goods. So the findings were most of the effectively used or well-known channels were phone calls and WhatsApp messages. And a deep dive further, there were also people who were definitely utilizing websites, but the numbers were few compared with the first two, as well as for Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. The numbers were not as high as compared to the phone calls and WhatsApp messages. Next slide. So we did a weighted ranking of the service offerings. So we wanted to find out when you are engaging your stakeholder, your service providers across these channels, what are the kind of services that you're asking for a lot? And the weighted ranking here, what we realized that we had dispensing was the highest accessed service. Most people were calling in to have a particular drug to be dispensed, but also people were just calling in for consultation. Maybe they wanted to consult about something they're not sure of. Was the next highest ranked. Then the third was counseling. Maybe somebody has an issue and they're seeking for care and they want to be counseled on how to approach it. Then we also had diagnostic services. People were calling in because some service providers, especially during COVID, started offering home care diagnostic services. So people now call in and say, I want you to come to my home. I'm not feeling well. Could you come? Maybe this is how I feel. And they run tests. So there was also that kind of service. And then the minimum here was adverse events reporting. There are very few clients who did say, we actually can call in if we're having a side effect of a drug. And actually some didn't even know that they can call into a service provider and report a side effect and be advised on how to manage it. Then we also looked at what are the frequently purchased commodities via these online channels. And the highest were the over-the-counter medicines, mainly for minor ailments like cough and flu. And then prescription-only medicines came next. And then we had oral and emergency contraceptives, as well as condoms, taking up the third position. The least purchased products were injectables, and mainly these injectables could be purchased maybe by medical centers who are calling wholesalers to have this kind of products delivered to them, but not really by an individual consumer. Next slide. So one of the areas of interest, apart from just understanding the general landscape of online pharmacy channels, there was also an interest in understanding specifically how are these channels being utilized for the delivery of contraceptives, because contraceptives remains one commodity that is moving a lot via the online channels. So the ministry was interested in understanding what are the contraceptives that people are ordering for the most to assess how the service is also being delivered. So we went a deep dive to understand more about the contraceptives, and we learned that mainly it was the short-term contraceptives that were being delivered online. And the long-term contraceptives, it was rare for somebody to ask for a long-term online because the majority of them you needed to have a one-on-one consultation with a service provider. Next slide. Methods of engagement online. I said earlier, most people are utilizing phone calls and WhatsApp messages. But outside that, there were also other channels we came across. For example, some facilities had inbuilt messaging platforms that they could use to engage with their customers. Maybe they can send messages through either email or through an SMS. And others actually also had inbuilt online chat boxes to be able to support engagement with the end users. Next slide. How does it work? How do the online pharmacy channels work? So we mapped out the process to understand from the time a client reaches out, how does the process work? So, and it was mainly categorized under 3 areas. First, there's order placement and validation. A customer always initiates the process by calling in and they place the order. Now, through that kind of conversation, the person who has picked up the call, maybe it is a pharmacist, has to, undergo and validate what is it that you want. If it's a prescription-only drug, to, dive deeper to say, do you have a prescription for this medicine? Could you maybe share with me the prescription details via WhatsApp or via email, depending on which channel is more convenient for the customer? Then once the validation has been done, they would now move next to, once the validation has been done, it will now move next to now processing the order and packaging it for delivery. And after packaging, the client was required to make a payment, either via a mobile payment or you do a cash on delivery. And most of the times, these deliveries were done by border cyclists, what we call motorcycle riders, to the patient's location. And then lastly, the client now could either give feedback on if they have received the medication or if they have any complaints as regarding to what they received vis-a-vis what they ordered for. So this is the process mapping that we did to understand the channel. Next slide. And we also did a deep dive to understand, okay, along the different processes, what is really happening. We said initially a client calls in, order placement and processing. So we asked the facilities, when the client calls in, because especially when it comes to prescription-only medicine, it's very important for you to have a record. So we're interested in finding out how much access do you actually have to patient records. And with 76.5% of the respondents, the service providers, did say that they had access to a patient record, which could oftentimes be shared via WhatsApp. And then 23.5% said we don't have access to a record. Someone will just call in and then we shall take a step further and dispense without knowing if they actually have a valid prescription or not. But also we are saying, okay, if you have access, we also want you to understand what's the level of access you have. Do you have access to the complete health record, or does somebody just take a snapshot of the medicine they need and then they share with you? So 52% did say we get a complete health record because we demand for it. But the rest of the respondents did say just part of the health record. Someone will just probably take a picture of that particular medicine they want, or they'll give you a very brief summary of it. So you may not understand, they may not understand the full composition of the health record. And this was specifically important because like we're looking is how is this channel being regulated to make sure that whatever is being dispensed, first of all, outside just safety and quality, it's actually also being dispensed to the right person, because there's a lot of drug abuse that was occurring across these online channels. And then through the mystery client interviews, like we said earlier, we did call in ourselves and just pretended to be mystery clients seeking for services. And some of the concerns that we registered in our engagement was the lack of privacy. For example, you could call in and you're put on loudspeaker to just say what it is that you want. Everybody can get to hear what it is that you're sharing. Sometimes service providers could exchange phones. You're talking to one service provider, then maybe they get busy, they give it to someone else. And oftentimes you feel your information was not being regarded in a confidential manner. Then we also looked into the transportation part of it, because we did say after packaging, these drugs are transported. So we wanted to understand what are the modalities of transportation that you're utilizing, considering that these services were new and they really came up a lot during COVID. And one of the things that came out strongly from the end users, they were not satisfied with the riders. Some of the riders who came didn't even have an idea about what it is that they were delivering, because most of these people were not medical people and they were not trained to understand the kind of substances they were carrying. Or some of them, they complained about issues of hygiene. Or some of them, they complained that we don't have a return policy, the policy of goods once delivered are not returned, and sometimes you have gotten a medicine that is different from what you ordered for. Next slide. So we found that the main barriers to accessing these channels, one, there was lack of knowledge and awareness, first of all, about the services and the service provider. We talked about low availability or low penetrability of smartphones, especially in the remote areas. There were also low literacy levels because most of the people complain that the online channels are only in English. If only they could be translated into local languages so that we can all be able to navigate the platforms effectively. But also there was impatience among the service providers as they're just rushing to just carry through a conversation very fast and they deliver medicine without really taking time to gather as much patient information as possible. And the challenges that were mainly encountered by the end users, they complained of the sitting of drugs, which are maybe they're almost getting expired, or sometimes they're having insufficient internet connection. Once you're still in a conversation with a service provider, your line is cut off, maybe because of internet connectivity issues. They also complain sometimes you place an order and you don't receive it, or you receive it late, or an order comes and it is incomplete. Maybe you ordered for more than what you were given. And also there were examples of some counterfeit products that were being moved online, which maybe had been announced by the national authorities that shouldn't be sold, but they could receive them through online channels. Next slide. Next slide. So we talked to other key stakeholders. Like we said, we talked to the Ministry of Health and also Ministry of ICT, this is information technology, to also understand from their perspective, how were they viewing these channels, since they have the biggest mandate for regulatory. And one of the issues of concern for them was there's limited research and insights on the outcomes of these services. They wanted to have more data collected. How can we have data collected, kept and reported to give us visibility on what are the transactions ongoing, what are the reported ailments ongoing? For example, if maybe there's an outbreak, can it begin being reported through an online channel and we miss it because we don't have data being integrated into our healthcare systems, which is coming from online? Then there's a concern of potential medicines abuse, like I earlier shared. A lot of the falsified medications we are going through online channels because there was minimal regulation. Then poor supply chain integrity. We would find that some of the riders that are, transporting these medicines from the pharmacists to the end users, they may not really go into the understanding the integrity of the packaging that needs to be used. Maybe if it's cold chain, or it needs to be a container that may not specifically be cold chain, but it can be regulating of temperatures to maintain the efficacy of the drug. So there was poor supply chain integrity most of the times. And also there was a concern that we don't have visibility on who are the different service providers to ease our work in regulation. Next slide. When it came to the clients, like earlier mentioned, there was an issue of poor service efficacy and quality, characterized by long delivery times, poor packaging of products, or even unhygienic riders. Then technological and connectivity challenges, like I earlier mentioned, internet connectivity, sometimes be a challenge. Then cybersecurity concerns, they felt that oftentimes there was a lack of data privacy. For example, one patient did say, I've been to a service provider before, I had a skin condition, I was given a cream which I utilized, and before, when I went back to the same pharmacy, my picture now was being utilized as a before and after. When you want to show the effectiveness of medicine, it's like, but I wasn't even consulted to be able to utilize my information. So those kind of concerns were there, that their information wasn't safe via online channels, and also inconsistency in communication and patient follow-up, usually from the service providers. Once they finish selling to you a particular product and you try to follow up, maybe we're not satisfied, there was less room or motivation for engagement. It was almost like business has been transacted, business has been finished, and there was little motivation to engage in case of follow-up. Next slide. Then for the online pharmacy operators themselves, they had their own challenges as well. Service access barriers was one of them, whereby they were talking about low affordability of smartphones in the remote areas. It prevents or it limits access of services. Then there were technological and connectivity challenges, which was internet connectivity as well, which could interrupt them from having continuous conversation with their clients. Then there was also lack of public trust in digital services. People needed to be sensitized about these services because majority of them are more comfortable with one-on-one interactions. Next slide. Then now these are the recommendations from the stakeholders. So the line ministries were interested in developing regulatory framework and standards. policy integration and awareness, service accessibility and efficiency, as well as data safety and privacy. These were the areas the Land Ministry wanted to strengthen to better regulate the channel. Next slide. Then from the clients, they were looking at how can we have more online information access? How can they have this information put in local languages so that they can easily be able to understand what is being shared? They also talked about service accessibility and efficiency to support the increase of how can we decentralize online channels to remote areas so that we don't have to always move from the remote villages to the urban centers to access this kind of service. And also communication channels. They were requesting for toll-free number so they can easily follow up in case they have any complaints with the service provider. Next slide. Then the online pharmacy operators were requesting for more, collaborations with government because they felt that the services could enable rich areas, especially vulnerable communities. They were like, can be able to reach these communities better. How can we collaborate, especially with the delivery of HIV/AIDS medication, the ARVs, because of the increased stigma where people don't want to come to healthcare facilities. There was advocacy for government to come and work with the service providers for digital channels so they can increase access to the remote areas and also to vulnerable communities. Next slide, please. And the civil society organization recommendation was mainly an issue of equity and inclusion to develop regulations that are practical for the end user, not just for the global environment, but for our Ugandan community. And also to onboard specialists that understand communication via online, so to make sure that whatever guidelines are coming in place, they're actually visible for these online channels. Next slide, please. Okay, so after this, what happened was we developed guidelines. The guidelines, I can't share them here, unfortunately, but we developed guidelines together with the Ministry of Health and the National Drug Authority as a recommendation for what we believed had to be worked on to strengthen the regulation of the online channels. As we speak, we had requested to be given 6 months to pilot the guidelines among selected service providers to see if they were actually feasible and they could be effective, which pilot has already been approved. And the next phase of this work, probably early into next year, we're supposed to now actually go in, implement what we have recommended and get to see if it makes sense. And then it can now move into various stages of advocacy to be embedded into existing policy frameworks. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Bessie, for an excellent presentation on the situation in Uganda. I hope you're able to consider publishing your guidelines and your experience in the future to let others.
I'll pass that recommendation to my team. Yeah.
Thank you, Madam Bessie. So it is time now for our next speaker. It is my pleasure to introduce you to Mr. Samuel Akufo. Samuel is a pharmacist and a health equity enthusiast leading the health operations team across all the zipline distribution centers across Africa. He provides direction and leadership in operational excellence as aerial logistics is utilized to increase access to vital medical products in areas that are very hard to reach. Thank you so much, Samuel. The floor is yours.
All right. Jaime, can you confirm you can hear me?
Yeah, I can. Thank you.
Okay. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. I'm really excited to be here to share this with you. At the end of this presentation, I'm hoping that we'll be able to talk through how we are using a transformative technology to particularly drone delivery in the pharmaceutical sector, to be able to also understand the role of technology in bridging health equity gaps, and then also draw learnings from the experience from Zipline in trying to integrate the technology within the healthcare ecosystem. Next slide, please. So what to expect? We'll speak about Zipline's global presence and impactful operations across the countries that it works in, but I'll zone in more on Ghana. We'll try to understand the revolutionary technology behind Zipline's design and its role in transforming supply chains, and then also be able to talk about how Zipline is using the innovative solutions in bridging medication access, exploring the tangible impact, because of course the technology can be great, but what is really important is the impact that it's making on lives, and that's something that we want to touch on. And also we can talk about some of the key learnings around scaling technologies into a nationwide operation. Next slide. So looking at the Africa ecosystem is quite complicated, but for most people who live in urban areas and urban communities, it might still seem strange, but about 60% of the population in Africa still lives in rural communities, as per the World Bank's assessment. And this means that we still have a huge population who live further away in areas that are rural. And by living in the rural communities, not necessarily meaning that they have a poor quality of life. Yeah, but the rural communities also have challenges that makes it difficult. If you're looking at on the pharmaceutical landscape, if you're looking at stock out rates for essential medicines in African countries exceeds 50%. And if you're looking at the fact that 60% of your population is living in rural communities, and you also have a stock out rate of 50%, then you could see that there's a real challenge that we are looking at here. Now, from a logistics point of view, Africa also ranks really low when you're talking about transportation of healthcare commodities and healthcare supply chain. And so it's very easy to sort of isolate the challenges that Africa has with healthcare logistics to it's possibly leading to the reasons why we have a huge stock out rate. But I cannot confirm that, but that is maybe a clear indication of what exactly is happening within that space. Next slide. In terms of the challenges that we have on the healthcare landscape, is very complicated. We have the pure healthcare challenges like lack of healthcare workers who want to go into these rural communities. Of course, any new pharmacist or new doctor wants to work in the urban space where they believe they can have all access to the kind of infrastructure that they need and be able to practice effectively. And so if you go into the rural communities as well, you have lack of healthcare workers, or the workforce in those areas is very low. Speaking about Ghana in particular, there are certain areas in Ghana where you go there just like a single pharmacist in a whole district. And so those are like real healthcare challenges. But there's something called social determinants of health, which I think that are not really health related, but have a way of creeping back into affecting health. And if you look at people living in rural communities, the likelihood of they having a very good education is also very low. And research has shown that people with very good education have better health-seeking behavior. Most people living in the rural communities are also likely to not have a very solid income. And so that also affects their health-seeking behavior. Their geographical location and barriers makes it challenging for healthcare commodities to even go to these areas. So, for instance, in Ghana, there are certain areas where if you want to get there, they are on a mountainous area. It's so tough that sometimes you have to go through another country before you can actually get back into the location where you want to go into. And so these geographical barriers makes it difficult for some of these critical healthcare commodities to go to these communities. Next slide. And so that is the problem that Zipline has been trying to solve around the world. Zipline is currently serving 5 African countries, and we have some operations across the US as well. But in Ghana alone, we have about 6 distribution centers. In Nigeria, we have 3 covering Kaduna, Bayelsa, and Cross River State. We also have a distribution center in the western side of Kenya. We have one in Cote d'Ivoire, and in Rwanda, we are covering the entire country with 2 distribution centers. Next slide. I'll say that over the years, Zipline has been able to do more than 1 million deliveries from drone deliveries globally. In Ghana alone, Zipline is trending around 600,000 plus deliveries. And as I speak to you right now, there are hundreds of drones in the air making deliveries. Most people thinking about drone delivery, the first thing that comes into their minds are the drones that are used for taking pictures. Yes, those are drones as well. But to be able to do this at national scale, you need a very robust system that can be able to stand the test of time and be very reliable. And so our drones are winged aircrafts that go a 115 kilometer service radius and can carry a maximum payload of 3 kg and have tested reliability, so they can fly through all harsh weather, and they have the best-in-class safety standards where we are able to monitor wherever it is that they are going. And so to be able to do this at national scale and be reliable and be able to meet the needs of people on a daily basis, you need to build a solid system. Next slide. As some of you may already know, our drones fly autonomously along pre-approved flights. And now what makes this challenge, what makes our operations challenging as well is the fact that we are trying to integrate our service within the two very highly regulated industries: healthcare, which is very highly regulated, and then aviation, which is also heavily regulated because they take safety really serious. And so you are flying drones that are making deliveries of healthcare commodities, and so you have to make sure that you are integrated into the healthcare system effectively, and also you are satisfying the needs of the aviation industry. And so we try to ensure that we have very solid coordination with them, creating visibility in terms of our technology for them to be able to visualize where our drones are at every point in time. And so the image on the left side is a visualization of how you would see the drones in the air from the direction of a regulator. And we've also given them the opportunity to be able to block us from flying to certain areas because of security reasons, or maybe because of something happening there or any other reason. So to be able to run something as efficient as this, it requires multi-layered stakeholder engagements across both healthcare and aviation. Next slide. We operate an end-to-end system where the focus is not just on the drone delivery itself, but we start off from warehousing and inventory management. And so we do storage and warehousing of healthcare commodities like essential medicines, vaccines, blood, and even vaccines for animal health and other commodities as well. And we then do the distribution, the preparation of the packages and distribution, and handle the distribution logistics to be able to ensure that 90% plus of the time we are on time with our deliveries, because most of the deliveries that we have to do are very critical and time sensitive. Now, one very important piece that gets overlooked is the fact that the data that is churned out from the drone deliveries that happen would really give a lot of insights. And a few months ago, I've been working on a project with in Ghana, where we've just been reviewing all the deliveries that we've done in Ghana with anti-snake venom. That data can be able to give you a solid insight as to where you have delivered all the anti-snake and anti-venom across the country. That could be some kind of surveillance data that could be able to tell anyone that looks at the data geographically to say that probably something is happening in this area. And that is why we keep getting a lot of requests from this area. So what do we need to do to be able to mitigate the risks in those areas? And so data is something that we hold really dear, and we always share and provide even insights of the data to our stakeholders. Next slide. Now, what problem are we really trying to solve? Someone will say, well, this seems really innovative, also could be quite expensive, but what are we trying to solve? We are trying to solve for a number of things. With the kind of service that we have, we're able to make deliveries that are precise, so we can deliver to where and when needed, irrespective of the time. And what puts us above other logistics options is the speed that we carry. These drones fly at a speed of 100 kilometers per hour. And if you have a critical case of an emergency where it's a life and death situation, where you have a mother who is bleeding, or you have a child who's been bitten by a snake, or you have something that you critically need, but at that point in time, you don't have it, time is not on your side. And as pharmacists, we already understand that when you are dealing with these emergency situations, time is very sensitive. And so every single second counts. And so in a situation where you have centralized stocks in a location where you can be able to fly quickly and be able to deliver within a short period of time, then that provides you with the opportunity to use drone delivery instantaneously. We are also working to eliminate overstocking. So we work in tandem with a ground logistics that is already doing what we call last mile distribution. With last mile distribution alone, there could be the tendency of even health facilities having stocks of products, and some other facilities don't even know that the other facilities have it, but they need it, but they don't know who has it. And there are also times when some facilities have more stocks than the others. And because the last mile delivery or the ground logistics is doing cycles of probably 2 months, 3 months, what happens is that it takes you 3 or 2 months for you to get your next stocks. And sometimes it takes longer for you to actually get your stocks. And what happens is that leaves you a long period of time when you don't have stocks. And so when there's an opportunity to request for products, there's a likelihood of you requesting for even more than you need. We're also solving for stock outs. And so for periods where we basically have a lock and key system with the ground logistics. And so periods where the ground logistics has not yet reached certain locations to provide them with their huge stock, they're able to fall on Zipline in the interim to receive few quantities of stocks that they can use until they get their full stock available. And research that we've done with stakeholders has also proven that once these health facilities that are receiving stocks from Zipline have availability of stocks, it's sort of reducing unnecessary referrals. Because one of the reasons why a lower level facility will refer a patient to a higher level facility is because probably they don't have what they need to manage the case at that particular point in time. When it comes to disaster response, I'll talk about disaster response a bit later, using an example of flooding a bit later. But with drone delivery, you're able to run a resilient system where you're able to centralize stocks, like anti-snake, anti-rabies, or products that have very high value, but also have the tendency of becoming very scarce, centralizing them within a location where everybody has access to. And I'll explain a bit later as we transition. But two other very critical things that we're also trying to solve is also trying to improve vaccination rates. When you're dealing with vaccination, you want to improve your coverage. Logistics is one of the very key things. And so if you are dealing with locations that are very hard to reach, island locations, mountainous areas, which will take you extra efforts to send medications to those locations, drone delivery becomes a good option for you. Next slide. So this is what I was explaining in the previous slide. When you in the situations where Zipline was not available in Ghana, periods where facilities have gone out of stock for a long period of time, when they have the opportunity to restock, they then sort of overstock because they don't know, because it creates a certain level of unreliability in their minds because they don't know when they're getting the next stock. But if you have the option of being able to hold small few stocks from Zipline or from drone delivery in between the cycles, then you are not really concerned about overstocking because you can actually get commodities whenever you need it. Next slide, please. How do we fit within the supply chain? So we currently don't run a parallel system, and we don't intend to. If you are trying to do health system strengthening, it is important that you integrate yourself within the already existing system. Otherwise, the already existing system will spit you out. And you will face a lot of resistance. And I heard the previous speakers talk about resistance. You will face it. And so we try to design our service within any country that we go to try to understand what they would use Zipline for and where we can fit within the supply chain. So in Ghana, we work with the different levels of the stores, the central, the regional medical stores. And what we do is that there are certain locations that are very hard to reach that ground logistics is not able to deliver efficiently to. So those locations are sort of seeded to Zipline for Zipline to deliver to those locations because, I mean, the ground logistics is very difficult to get to those locations. And then ground logistics can also focus on some of the areas that are very easy to access. We are also available during campaign periods especially for vaccines or routine immunizations, where you have maybe stocks that are very close dated or are close to expiry, and you want to push a lot into the communities. Drone delivery is an option for you as well. So we run an integrated system and not a parallel system. And Zipline as an entity does not even own, we don't own the commodities that we stock. The commodities are commodities that come from the health system, the regional medical stores or the health system itself. They are just using Zipline as a way of being able to be efficient at distributing their own stocks. And that is a more sustainable approach to use when you are trying to integrate any digital technology within the system. Next slide, please. In terms of our impact in Ghana, so we currently have 6 distribution centers. The 2 on the upper left are ones that are yet to be built, but we have 6 that are active. The status quo before Zipline came into the picture was more of, and I'll say that as it is right now, Zipline in Ghana has the largest drone delivery distribution network in the world. Difficulty to reach remote communities in Ghana, that was the status quo. There's difficulty in equitably distributing rare and scarce commodities, and then, significant investment in trying to put cold chain facilities everywhere, right? Which any government would want to definitely push for that. But coming into partnership with the government, with this kind of system in place, we have access to over 2,000 health facilities, remote health facilities, just from all our distribution centers. We've been able to record higher medical product stocking rates and reduced stockouts. We've been able to collaborate with the government to centralize stocks of some of these critical antivenoms, which research has proven that it's been able to improve even how long the stocks are able to last. Next slide, please. So I'd like to pivot on COVID-19 response in Ghana, because that was a very tough period, but that was also a period where technology really showed up. And I'll say that for Zipline, we were very busy around that period. So if you look at what we did during the COVID period, if you're looking at the graph on your far right, in the 13th week, I think that was somewhere around 30th March, there was a lockdown that was announced in Ghana. And what you could see is that immediately on the 14th week, we had a huge volume of volume of stocks that we had to distribute because there was a lockdown and movement was restricted. Meanwhile, health facilities still need to use vaccines to vaccinate people. And so we received huge requests to be able to distribute. That tends to be a signal of having a very resilient system, where when you have a shutdown of ground logistics, you have resilient aerial logistics being able to kick in, and it's like a system that flexes, and more like a resilient kind of supply chain. That was one way that the government was actually able to see our impact really in a very big way, because during that period when COVAX was making vaccines available, Ghana was one of the first few countries to receive the first batch of COVID vaccines from the COVAX facility. And that was because Ghana had the resilient system where we have ground logistics, we have aerial logistics. And so for the easily accessible areas, we can use ground logistics to distribute. And for areas that are very hard to reach, you can use drone delivery to distribute. I would say that over 4 million vaccine doses have been delivered to date. This is the routine immunization vaccines. And then we delivered more than 2.5 million COVID vaccines as well from that time up until now. Next slide. This was a statement that was made by the Minister for Health around that time. Through our partnership with Zipline, we have developed a new vaccine delivery model to ensure COVID-19 vaccines are quickly accessible across the country, helping us slow the spread of COVID-19 and protect people everywhere. The good thing about this is that if you were following the news around that time, the first batch of vaccines that also came in were very short dated. They didn't have a very long expiration period. And you also have a very short period of time to push them out and actually get people to use it so that you can achieve herd immunity. And so if you don't have a system like this where you can push huge volumes, because a single package from Zipline can push about 50 vials of a vaccine, which is if it's a 10-dose vaccine, that's 500 doses in a delivery. So that tells you the quantum of work that can be done within a short period of time once you have both ground logistics as well as aerial logistics, which is drone delivery. And they both have a place, and they are both able to, they both have their own strengths. It's just a way of understanding how to use them for your own benefit. But I'll say that nothing really expired in Ghana because we were able to support the state in pushing as many as possible the vaccines that came in during the COVID period for us to be able to progress. Next slide, please. I mentioned I was going to talk about flooding. So this is something really that happened. So during flooding, during certain periods in the country, especially in the northern part of Ghana, when it rains, we have floods. And when you have a flood, it means that no one can go towards these areas, but that there are health facilities over there who have a high need for these commodities. And especially around this time, malaria is also really on the rise around that period. And during this period, 28 out of 216 districts in the country were entirely cut off. With a situation like this, the trucks are unable to go. And so in collaboration with the ground logistics partners, we are able to collaborate and then be able to send healthcare commodities to these locations. So this is a situation where you in Ghana, you can sort of forecast, because something that happens every year. But if it happens in a location where you're not really sure this is going to happen, you'll be in a situation where people would need medications, they won't have it because they've been cut off, right? Next slide. In terms of scarce product management, I mentioned this early on. So when you are dealing with products that have very erratic supply chain, like anti-snake, anti-rabies, you are not able to effectively forecast. And interestingly, for those who know, especially in Ghana, maybe in other countries it might be the same, but these are also the products that once it gets onto the market, it gets onto the black market and people sell it. And these are products that are supposed to be free, anti-snake and anti-rabies, and people sell it because they know once someone gets bitten by a snake, all hell is breaking loose. People will pay any amount of money for the product. So in collaborating with the government to decide to centralize these stocks, we realized that it takes a longer period for these stocks to actually stay, because then once people need it within a short period of time, they can request and then they quickly receive it. And every now and then we can also send them some few buffer stocks to be able to keep. By doing this, you are able to manage expiries. You're able to manage unethical distribution of the very scarce commodity within the black market, and then you are also able to save lives. Next slide, please. In terms of impacts backed by independent studies, we've done some studies with the Lancet, with Wharton, Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, the Ministry of Health in Ghana. In Rwanda, Zipline distributes all the blood within the country outside of Kigali. And the research we did with the Lancet showed that there's a 67% fewer blood products wasted. And if you know how blood supply is, it's pretty interesting because they have a very short shelf life. And because they have a short shelf life, they would, you need to really push it quickly. So using drone delivery allows you to be able to push them quickly, get new stocks, and keep moving without having any expirations. There's a 51% fewer maternal deaths due to postpartum hemorrhage. We have also realized that facilities that use Zipline are 42% less likely to have a patient that will miss their vaccination opportunity. And then with all the flights that we are doing, we are using a very green approach. There's a reduction in CO2 emissions compared to cars. We've done millions of deliveries around the world, but it's still a very green approach. Next slide. Yeah, so this is my last slide. I would say that the future of pharmaceutical logistics, this is my last but one slide actually. I think drone delivery will scale across Africa. In the next few years, we'll be integrating AI and machine learning to optimize our operations. I know a lot of countries have these logistics management information systems. Very soon, they'll have inbuilt into them AI and some blockchain technology and other things like that. Robots and things will be coming very soon. We are going to be seeing more partnerships with private sector and international organizations. Telemedicine is also going to integrate really well with e-pharmacy as well as drone delivery. All that is going to sync together. So these are things that we should get used to. Next slide, please. That's going to be my last slide. In summary, I would say that technology is a game changer. And we need to back any data-driven innovation. And it's only going to work when we have collaborative partnerships because the partnership with Zipline and Government of Ghana is a private-public partnership. And so more partnerships like that with the young people coming up can be able to change the picture for health equity. I think the future is really bright, but for us pharmacists, I think our role is to be key enablers. You will face a lot of resistance. I heard from Takunda, his own resistance that he faced, but we are supposed to be key enablers and not block off any new thing that is coming our way, but try to enable it and shape things and use policy advocacy to be able to drive home some of these new digital technologies that can really bridge equity for our patients. So I think, in summary, technology is the bridge that connects innovation with lives we seek to save. Thank you.
Thank you, Samuel, for excellent presentation. Congratulations for the work you're doing. I have a big interest also in supply chain as a pharmacist, and how you're using technology to simplify how products are delivered to the people that need them, with the many advantages that you covered with the stock management, adherence to medications, etc. It was a great presentation. Congratulations for your work. So it is now time for the Q&A. I think we have a couple of minutes to cover a few of your questions. I would like to call Navembesi and Takunda, please, if you can open your cameras for the Q&A. Thank you. So very briefly, Takunda, we have a couple of questions about your experience. How do you see your technology evolving in the region, becoming international?
So actually, when I created the system, I actually had the region in mind because most of the narcotics regulations are pretty much the same across the region. And so I think this is, and because it's got interoperability capabilities, it can easily be scaled regionally.
Thank you, Takuna, and also to have a bigger market to make your solution sustainable, which is also important. We need to talk about reimbursement for these tools, and they need to be sustainable, of course.
Yes.
Thank you. So a question for Nabembesi, as far from Mehmet Kishiba. Thank you for your question. The previous one was from Baba Nije. Thank you also. So the question is, as far as we know that the internet can play a great role in the widespread of falsified and substandard medical products, how you could manage this issue while the online facility is permitted? You are muted, Nabembesi.
Yes, okay. So about the issue of managing falsified medicine across the internet, one of the, for example, the recommendations we are pushing for is, first and foremost, it has to be written in policy that any pharmacy that is engaging in online pharmacy services must be registered by the National Drug Authority. Because currently what we're seeing is people could even buy these medicines and they carry out these services in the comfort of their homes because it's purely an online channel. So one of the recommendations we're pushing for that it must be somebody who is registered, a pharmaceutical outlet already, that is a brick and mortar outlet, not an online, nothing like purely online. You have to have a brick and mortar extension of your online pharmacy services. Reason being, the brick and mortar are being extensively regulated. You have to report on where you're purchasing your medicines from. You have to fill up, they have pharmacovigilance systems where they do biannual reporting on any kind of maybe side effects that patients are reporting about utilizing their medication. So already that helps to ensure that the brick and mortars are making sure that they're also dealing in authentic and also regulated medicines on the market. So that was one of the first things that we are pushing for, to be able to control, because the brick and mortar are in direct linkage with the National Drug Authority, so that can help to sieve out the extent of falsified medicine via online channels.
Thank you. And also, in my experience, technology also can be an enabler to reassuring clients and patients about that the products they are consuming by different schemes that are already in the market. Also in Europe, we have this track and trace system that makes the supply chain very safe in terms of not being able to introduce fake and substandard products. So thank you for your comments. And Samuel, I'm very curious. First, congratulations for what you said about pharmacies being enablers. That's I totally agree with that. And FIP is the right place for those enablers. We need to lead the change. And I'm very interested if you can give us a couple of thoughts about how do you think AI and machine learning can support the delivered products, especially to zipline.
Yes. So first of all, even the drones that we use are built based on AI and machine learning. And you see, if you have a very strong data bank, right? For example, at Zipline, for instance, we've done thousands of deliveries so far. If we are able to use machine learning to look through the data, right? The data can be able to tell us something, a story that we don't know, or be able to generate some insights that we don't know. I know in Ghana, for instance, they have a logistics management information system that is supposed to sort of allow them be able to do transactions of healthcare commodities once they receive stocks from the ground logistics. Now, they've been using it for like a year now, but how are they using AI and machine learning to be able to use that data that they have to be able to sort of affect forecasting and how they are even, doing their distribution and everything. So that all that data still sits there, but it could really be something that we could mine and get insights from to be able to tweak the systems that we have. So I think in the next few years, a lot of these logistics management information systems would have inbuilt or embedded in them some of these tools that would be able to, even without you asking, be able to sort of give you an insight. Oh, hey, this is happening. Have you noticed that based on the data we have? And I think that is going to be very revolutionary. I think even from something as simple as even your farm, like in the pharmacy, a community pharmacy, you are just been dispensing a particular medication all week. Based on the data that you've generated by doing all this dispensing, over a period of time, there should be something that tells you that there's a trend that's happening in your community and you haven't noticed. And so if that is able to pick up that trend and share with you, that makes our work easier. We are able to, push for initiatives backed by solid data. And I think one of the things that we need to push for as pharmacists as well is to get every pharmacist involved in data, understanding how data works. I know our older generations probably may not have been so interested, but where the world is going now is something that is really important for us to really get interested in understanding what is the data saying, right? Even in the hospital management system that is being used every single day, people are just interested in pulling reports out of it. But the data that sits on there, what is it saying, right? And I think these new age tools will be able to revolutionize that whole landscape.
Totally. Big data is going to allow us to predict many things, even things that we still don't know, including shortages and making our stock management much more efficient. So thank you, the three of you, for these great presentations. I'm very sure that our attendees really appreciated them and learned from them, as we saw in the chat. So it is now time we don't have time for more questions, unfortunately. For a few closing remarks from me, and then close the webinar. We had Takunda explaining us how his personal trip developing WebDD from a manual, time-consuming, and unsafe management of narcotics records to a digitalized, environmentally friendly, and more efficient digital record. We had Nabembesi presenting us her experience in Uganda, showing us how complex digital ecosystem can be and the many opportunities for improvement. And we had Samuel explaining us his experience in Zipline and how a precise supply chain management can improve people's lives in a very direct way. So thank you all, the three of you, for your excellent presentations. It is my pleasure to introduce you to the next FIP World Congress of Pharmacy in Copenhagen, Pharmacy Forward. And these are the sub-themes that we will cover, and where you will be able to meet very proficient colleagues as the ones that we had today, to be able to even network and learn and share your own experiences. So we would be very excited to welcome you in Copenhagen next August and September. Check all the future FIP digital events here in this website. And I think this is all from us. Thank you very much for attending, and I apologize for being 3 minutes late. I hope you have a great rest of your day. Thank you all.